They said the galaxy had forgotten its monsters, but monsters don't disappear. They evolve, hide behind thrones and promises, and sometimes the only one who can reveal the truth is the one you were told to fear the most. Raindrops slid down Kayla Virel's high cheekbones, emphasizing her deep blue skin. The cold wetness was a stark contrast to the burning determination in her eyes. A huntress, a tracker, a killer when needed. Her live form moved with practiced grace through the dense alien foliage, each step calculated and silent. This time, she hunted for her king. The weight of her mission pressed down on her like the relentless storm above. His orders echoed in her mind, clear and uncompromising. Find and capture the fugitive human, a man known only as the fallen beast. Kayla had heard the stories about hot bloods, humans. They were reckless, brutal, incapable of restraint. But this one was something else entirely. He left no trail, moved like a shadow, vanishing into thin air every time she thought she had him cornered. It was as if he could predict her every move, always staying one step ahead. As she pursued him, Kayla found herself increasingly conflicted. The unwavering certainty that had driven her at the start of this hunt was beginning to crack. She remembered the king's words when he'd given her this mission, his voice filled with righteous anger as he spoke of justice for her slaughtered people. But now, doubt crept in like an insidious fog. Why did this human seem so different from the monster she'd been told about? How could a brutish killer move with such grace and intelligence? These questions gnawed at her, challenging everything she thought she knew. In quiet moments, between the chase, Kayla's mind wandered to her home world. She saw the sweeping blue forests of her childhood, heard the melodic songs of her people echoing through crystal canyons. The ache of loss hit her anew, along with a surge of loyalty to her king, the man who had given her purpose after everything had been taken away. But that loyalty was no longer the unshakable foundation it once was. It wavered like a flame in the wind, threatening to extinguish entirely. Kayla shook her head, pushing away the doubts. She had a mission to complete. Her people deserved justice, and she would deliver it, even if a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something about this hunt felt terribly wrong. Kayla stood before the king in his private chambers, her posture rigid with anticipation. The king's face was grave as he activated a holographic display. "What I'm about to show you, Kayla, is deeply disturbing," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "But you need to understand the true nature of the beast you are hunting." The hologram flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a settlement, one Kayla recognized as an outpost on her home world. Her breath caught as she saw figures moving through the streets, her people going about their daily lives. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the scene. A ship, sleek and predatory, descended from the sky. The footage zoomed in, and Kayla's heart stopped as she audio cut out figure standing in the open hatch, a man with golden eyes. What followed was a scene of pure carnage. Energy weapons tore through buildings, bodies fell in the streets, and at the center of it all was the golden-eyed man moving with inhuman speed and precision. Kayla felt sick. This can't be real," she whispered. The king placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I wish it wasn't, my dear, but this is the truth of what happened that day. The beast you're hunting is more dangerous than we ever imagined." He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the face of the attacker. Those golden eyes seemed to stare right through Kayla, filled with a cold, alien intelligence. "Our intelligence suggests he's not fully human," the king continued. "Some kind of hybrid, or perhaps an augmented being. That's why he's so difficult to track, so lethal in combat. Kayla's fists clenched at her sides, her earlier doubts evaporating in the face of this evidence. "I'll find him," she vowed, her voice hard with renewed determination. "I'll bring him to justice for what he's done." The king nodded solemnly. "I know you will, Kayla. You're the only one I trust with this mission. But be careful. He's more dangerous than any enemy you've faced before." As Kayla left the king's chambers, her mind replayed the horrific footage. The doubts that had begun to creep in during her pursuit were now silenced. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. The fallen beast was a monster, and she would stop at nothing to bring him down. Little did she know that the footage she had seen was a masterful fabrication, a web of lies woven by the very man she trusted most. The real truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. After 7 relentless days of pursuit across 3 different planets, she finally had him cornered on the dead world of Vortex 9. It was a wasteland of jagged cliffs and endless storms, where predators thrived in the perpetual darkness, the perfect hunting ground for a beast. As she approached her quarry, Kayla's heart raced not just with the thrill of the hunt, but with a churning mix of anticipation and dread. She was about to come face to face with the being she'd been chasing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she might discover. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the barren landscape for a brief moment. In that flash, Kayla saw him, a silhouette standing at the edge of a ravine, looking down into the abyss below. Her heart raced with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. This was it, the culmination of her hunt. Kayla raised her blade, its edge glowing with a faint blue light that hummed with latent energy. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. "It's over," she called out, her voice carrying over the howling wind. "You're coming with me." He turned slowly, and Kayla felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain. Golden beast-like eyes met hers, seeming to glow with an inner fire. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before, primal, intelligent, and filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Amusement, resignation, and then he smirked. It was a small gesture, barely a twitch of his lips, but it spoke volumes. In that moment, Kayla realized that despite her certainty, despite having chased this man across the stars, she knew absolutely nothing about him. "You sure about that?" His voice was low, gravelly, with an accent she couldn't place. It sent another shiver through her body. Before Kayla could react, he stepped back and plunged into the darkness below. "No." The word tore from her throat as she lurched forward, disbelief warring with frustration. She had come too far, fought too hard to let him escape now. Without a second thought, Kayla cursed and leapt after him. The wind whipped past her as she fell, the darkness of the ravine swallowing her whole. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline surging through her veins. This was madness. Pure, unadulterated insanity. And yet, she couldn't stop. The thrill of the chase, the need to complete her mission drove her forward. As they plummeted, Kayla twisted in midair, her enhanced vision allowing her to make out the human's form in the gloom. She reached for him, fingers grasping at empty air, as he seemed to dance just out of her reach. How was he moving like that? It was as if he was in control of his fall, while she tumbled helplessly. The ground rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed. Kayla braced herself for impact, her body tensing. Pain exploded through her as she hit the rocky floor of the ravine. She rolled, instinct taking over, her blade still clutched tightly in her hand. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she pushed through it, ready to face her quarry. Too slow. A weight crashed down on her, knocking the air from her lungs. In a blur of motion she couldn't quite follow. Her wrists were pinned above her head, and heat pressed down on her body. He was on top of her. Kayla bucked, trying to throw him off, but his grip was like iron, immovable, inescapable. Panic began to set in as she realized just how outmatched she might be. "Get off me," she snarled, baring her teeth in a gesture that would have sent most opponents scrambling backward. But not him. Not this human. His golden eyes burned into hers, filled with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, his breath warm against her skin. It was disconcerting. "You hunt well," he murmured, his voice like a growl that she could feel rumbling through his chest. "But you don't understand who you're chasing, do you?" The words hit Kayla like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the hunt, on completing her mission, that she hadn't stopped to question it. Who was this man? Why was he so important to her king? Anger flared within her, pushing back the doubt. "You murdered my people," she spat, renewing her struggles against his grip. His expression darkened, a shadow passing over his features. For a moment, Kayla thought she saw pain in those strange golden eyes. "Is that what your king told you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. For the first time since receiving her orders, doubt crawled into Kayla's mind. She had never questioned her king before. His word was law, his judgment absolute, but there was something in the human's voice, a certainty that made her wonder. Before she could voice the questions suddenly swirling in her mind, the ground beneath them trembled. Distant footsteps, heavy, not human. They weren't alone. In an instant, the dynamic between them shifted. The human's grip on her wrists loosened, and Kayla found herself moving in sync with him as they sprang to their feet. They stood back to back, weapons at the ready, facing the darkness that surrounded them. From the shadows emerged a gang of warriors, scarred, brutal figures armed to the teeth, with a hodgepodge of advanced weaponry and primitive blades. Kayla's eyes widened as, she recognized the insignias on their battered armor. Not just any warriors, cutthroats, mercenaries, traitors to the crown. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute with one silver eye, stepped forward. A cruel grin spread across his face as he took in the scene before him. "Well, well, what do we have here?" His voice was like gravel, filled with malicious amusement. Kayla's grip tightened on her blade, its soft blue glow casting eerie shadows across the ravine floor. She could feel the human beside her tense, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash devastation. To her surprise, the human exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his form. "You're late," he said, his tone almost conversational. The silver-eyed man chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Kayla's spine. "Had to let you sweat a little, brother." Kayla's eyes snapped to the human, shock and confusion warring within her. "You know them," she hissed, feeling suddenly out of her depth. What was going on here? "Used to," the human replied, his voice low and tinged with regret. The cutthroats began to circle them, moving with the practiced coordination of seasoned killers. Kayla counted at least a dozen, each one looking more vicious than the last. Her mind raced, trying to calculate their odds of survival. It didn't look good. And the blue-skinned girl, the leader sneered, his silver eye gleaming as he looked Kayla up and down. "She yours?" The implication in his tone made Kayla's skin crawl. She opened her mouth to spit out a retort, but the human beat her to it. He stepped forward, his posture radiating a quiet, deadly intensity. "Touch her," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "and I'll break your spine." The gang laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the ravine walls, but their laughter died quickly as they realized the human wasn't joking. There was something in his stance, in the set of his shoulders, that spoke of barely contained violence. Kayla's pulse spiked, her mind whirling with the confusion. He had just fought her, pinned her down. Why was he protecting her now? What game was he playing? "We don't have to fight," the human said, addressing the group. His tone was reasonable, but Kayla could hear the underlying steel in his words. "Let us pass." The leader spat at his feet, a gesture of utter contempt. "You know the rules," he growled. "If you want out, you fight for it." The circle of cutthroats tightened, weapons raised and ready. Kayla could smell their anticipation, their hunger for violence. These were men who lived for the thrill of the kill, who reveled in bloodshed. She turned to the human, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication. Despite everything, the chase, the fight, the confusion, Kayla knew in that instant that they were on the same side, at least for now. "Guess we're fighting together now," she said, a hint of a challenge in her voice. He flashed a sharp grin, his golden eyes glinting with a fierce light. "Try to keep up, Huntress." And then all hell broke loose. The cutthroats charged as one, a wave of steel and savage intent crashing down upon them. Kayla and the human moved in perfect synchronization, as if they'd had fought side by side 100 times before. Blades flashed in the dim light of the ravine. Bones cracked under the impact of fists and feet. Blood hit the dirt, splattering across rocks and boots alike. Kayla fought like a storm incarnate, her strikes fast and brutal. Her blade hummed through the air, leaving trails of blue light in its wake as it bit deep into flesh and armor. She ducked and weaved, her lithe form allowing her to slip between opponents with fluid grace. The human, by contrast, fought like the beast they called him. His movements were all raw power and primal fury. He broke enemies with sheer force, using their own momentum against them. Bones shattered under his blows, and more than once, Kayla heard the sickening crunch of a skull giving way beneath his fists. They moved in sync, their battle turning into a deadly dance of survival. When Kayla ducked, the human was there to catch the blow meant for her head. When he stumbled, she covered his flank, her blade singing as it tasted blood. One by one, the cutthroats fell. Some fled into the darkness, nursing broken limbs and shattered pride. Others lay still on the ground, their lifeless eyes staring up at the stormy sky above. In the end, only the silver-eyed leader remained. He staggered back, panting heavily, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. His one good eye darted between Kayla and the human, a mixture of fear and grudging respect in his gaze. "You always were a stubborn bastard," he muttered, addressing the human. The human raised his weapon, a wicked-looking blade that Kayla hadn't even seen him draw. "And you always picked the wrong side." A single shot rang out, echoing off the ravine walls. The silver-eyed man's remaining eye widened in shock. He looked down at the smoking hole in his chest, then back up at the human. A gurgling laugh escaped his lips as he collapsed to the ground, dead before he hit the dirt. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing and the distant rumble of thunder. Kayla looked at the bodies strewn around them, then back at the human. He stood still, his blade dripping blood onto the rocky ground, his chest heaving with exertion. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that he was no ordinary fugitive. "You're not just a fugitive, are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, those strange golden eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. Without a word, he wiped the blood from his blade and sheathed it. "No," he said finally, "and your king isn't the man you think he is." Kayla felt her breath catch in her throat. There it was again, that certainty in his voice, the weight of truth behind his words. "What do you mean?" she demanded, her mind reeling. Instead of answering directly, he reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled something out. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it to her. Kayla caught it reflexively, her enhanced reflexes kicking in. It was a medallion, broken in half but still recognizable. Her eyes widened as she traced the familiar pattern etched into its surface. It bore the royal sigil, the same sigil worn by the men who had slaughtered her people. She felt her stomach twist, a cold dread settling over her. This can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your king ordered the massacre," the human said, his voice gentle but firm, "and pinned it on me." Kayla couldn't breathe. The medallion felt like it was burning her palm, the weight of its implications threatening to crush her. Everything she had fought for, everything she had believed in, it was all a lie. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was a deep, weary sadness. "Then I've been hunting the wrong enemy," she said, her voice hollow. His golden eyes met hers, and in them she saw a glimmer of something new. Hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of trust. "So what are you going to do about it?" he asked. Kayla felt something shift within her. The shock and disbelief gave way to a cold, hard anger. She had been used, manipulated into becoming a weapon against her own people. Her grip tightened on her blade, its soft blue glow intensifying as if responding to her resolve. "I'm going to kill my king," she said, her voice low and deadly. The human nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Then I guess we have work to do." As the words left his mouth, a distant rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't thunder this time. It was something else. Something massive. Kayla and the human exchanged a quick glance before scrambling up the ravine wall. As they reached the top, the sight that greeted them made Kayla's blood run cold. A massive ship loomed on the horizon, its sleek black hull seeming to absorb the light around it. It was a dreadnought, one of the king's planet-killer vessels. "Looks like your king isn't taking any chances," the human muttered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the approaching threat. Kayla's mind raced. A dreadnought could glass the entire planet, turning it into a molten wasteland. "We need to get off this rock," she said urgently. "Now." The human nodded, his expression grim. "I've got a ship hidden not far from here. Think you can keep up, Huntress?" Despite the dire situation, Kayla felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Try not to fall behind, beast." They took off across the barren landscape, the storm above them intensifying, as if nature itself was reacting to the approaching danger. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their path in brief, blinding flashes. As they ran, Kayla's mind whirled with questions. "How did you know?" she shouted over the howling wind. "About the king, about the massacre." The human vaulted over a jagged outcropping, his movements fluid despite the treacherous terrain. He glanced back at her, his golden eyes unreadable. "It's complicated," he called back, his voice carrying a weight of unspoken history. Kayla pressed on, both physically and verbally. "Complicated how? You owe me some answers." He was silent for a moment, focusing on navigating a particularly treacherous stretch of ground. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "I've seen things, done things that I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to make it right." Before Kayla could probe further, a piercing cry cut through the air. Both of them skidded to a halt, scanning their surroundings. There, trapped beneath a fallen boulder, was a young Vortexian, one of the few native species that managed to survive on this harsh world. Without hesitation, the human changed course, sprinting towards the trapped creature. Kayla followed, bewildered. This wasn't the action of a ruthless killer, of the beast she had been hunting. As they reached the Vortexian, the human spoke softly, his tone soothing. "Easy there, little one. We're here to help." He turned to Kayla. "Help me lift this, careful. Vortexians are delicate despite their environment." Together they managed to shift the boulder enough for the creature to wriggle free. It chirped gratefully, nuzzling against the human's hand before scampering off into the gloom. Kayla stared at him, her worldview shifting yet again. You know about Vortexians. You speak their language." He nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. "I've spent time here before, studied the local fauna. It was a lifetime ago, it seems." As they resumed their race against time, Kayla found herself reevaluating everything she thought she knew about this man. The fallen beast wouldn't have risked their escape to save a helpless creature. He wouldn't have spoken with such gentleness, such familiarity with a world that wasn't his own. Who was he really? And how much of what she had been told was a lie? These questions burned in Kayla's mind as they finally reached the hidden ship. As they strapped in and prepared for takeoff, she made a silent vow to uncover the truth about this human, about her king, and about the tragedy that had shaped her life. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but Kayla was beginning to realize that the greatest peril might be to everything she had once believed to be true. "That's your ship?" she gasped, impressed despite herself. The human flashed her a quick grin. "She's called the Shadow Dancer, and she's about to save our lives." As they approached, the ship's hatch hissed open, a ramp extending to meet them. They sprinted up it, the metal clanging beneath their feet. No sooner had they entered than the hatch sealed behind them, and Kayla felt the deck vibrate as the engines roared to life. The human was already at the controls, his hands flying over the console with practiced ease. "Strap in," he called over his shoulder. "This is going to get rough." Kayla barely had time to secure herself in the co-pilot's seat before the Shadow Dancer leapt into the air. The sudden acceleration pressed her back into her seat, her breath catching in her throat. Through the view screen, she watched as the ground fell away, the stormy landscape of Vortex 9 shrinking rapidly. But the dreadnought wasn't about to let them escape so easily. A barrage of energy beams crisscrossed the sky, creating a deadly web of destruction. The human's hands danced over the controls, guiding the Shadow Dancer through the onslaught with impossible precision. The ship rolled and dove, each maneuver more daring than the last. Kayla's stomach lurched as they narrowly avoided beam after beam, the hull creaking under the strain. "We can't outrun that thing," Kayla said, her eyes fixed on the pursuing behemoth. "It's too powerful." The human's lips curled into a predatory smile. "We don't need to outrun it. We just need to outsmart it." With that, he pulled back hard on the controls. The Shadow Dancer shot straight up, climbing at a near vertical angle. Kayla felt the G-forces pressing down on her, threatening to crush her into her seat. "What are you doing?" she managed to gasp out. "Something stupid," he replied, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. "Hold on tight." Just as they reached the upper atmosphere, where the air was thin and the stars shone with piercing clarity, the human cut the engines. For a heart-stopping moment, they hung suspended in space, weightless. Then they began to fall. The Shadow Dancer plummeted back towards the planet, gathering speed with each passing second. Kayla's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the ground rush up to meet them. The dreadnought, caught off guard by the maneuver, struggled to bring its weapons to bear. "You're insane," Kayla whispered, a mix of terror and exhilaration coursing through her veins. The human's only response was a fierce grin. At the last possible moment, when it seemed certain they would smash into the planet's surface, he fired the engines. The Shadow Dancer pulled up sharply, skimming mere meters above the ground. The sudden change in direction sent shockwaves rippling through the air, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. Using the cover provided by the dust storm, the human guided their ship into a narrow canyon, weaving between towering rock formations with breathtaking skill. The dreadnought, too large and unwieldy to follow, was left behind, its energy beams firing blindly into the haze. Minutes that felt like hours passed as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Finally, the human eased back on the throttle, allowing the Shadow Dancer to settle into a more relaxed flight path. "I think we lost them," he said, his voice tight with contained excitement. Kayla let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was impressive," she admitted, her heart still racing from the adrenaline rush. The human chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm. "High praise from the woman who chased me across 3 planets." Then as the immediate danger passed, the weight of their situation settled over them once more. Kayla turned to face the human, her expression serious. "You said you were there," she began, her voice quiet but intense. "At the massacre, what did you see? What really happened?" The human's face darkened, his golden eyes taking on a haunted look. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the stars visible through the view screen. "It wasn't supposed to be a massacre," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "I was part of a diplomatic mission. Your people, the Ver, had discovered something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy." Kayla leaned forward, hanging on his every word. This was the truth she had been seeking, the reality behind the lies she had been fed for so long. "What was it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The human's hands tightened on the controls, a source of clean, limitless energy. Your scientists had cracked the code to harnessing quantum fluctuations on a massive scale. It would have made traditional fuel sources obsolete overnight. Kayla's mind reeled at the implications. Such a discovery would have catapulted her people to the forefront of galactic politics, making them a major player in interstellar affairs. "But the king," she said, the pieces starting to fall into place. "He didn't want that, did he?" The human shook his head. "No, he wanted the technology for himself. When your leaders refused to hand it over, he ordered the attack." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of countless lives lost. Kayla felt a surge of anger, of betrayal rising within her. And you?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. "Where do you fit into all this?" He turned to look at her, his golden eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. "I tried to stop it. I warned your people, helped as many as I could escape. But in the end, I failed." Kayla absorbed this information, her worldview shifting yet again. The man she had been hunting, the beast she had been told was responsible for so much death and destruction, was in fact a hero who had tried to save her people. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked. Why run? A bitter smile crossed his face. Who would believe me? The king's propaganda machine worked overtime to paint me as the villain. It was easier for people to accept a single monster as the cause than to face the truth about their beloved ruler. Silence fell between them as Kayla processed everything she had learned. The stars streaked by outside, a reminder of the vast, uncaring universe that had allowed such atrocities to occur. Finally she spoke, her voice filled with quiet resolve. So what do we do now? The human, she realized she still didn't know his name, turned to her, his expression softening slightly. Now we gather an army. We find others who know the truth, who are willing to fight, and then we take down a king. Kayla finished, her eyes blazing with newfound purpose. He nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. Exactly. But first, introductions are in order. I'm Riven Dax, Kayla Virel, she replied, extending her hand in a gesture of alliance, and perhaps something more. Riven took her hand, his grip firm and warm. Well, Kayla Virel, are you ready to turn the galaxy on its head? A slow smile spread across Kayla's face, matching the fierce determination in Riven's eyes. I thought you'd never ask. As the shadow dancer sailed through the star-studded void, its two occupants began to plan. They would gather an army, survivors, rebels, warriors with nothing left to lose, and they would bring justice to those who had, for too long, escaped it. The hunt was over. The war was about to begin. Months passed in a blur of covert meetings, daring raids, and narrow escapes. Kayla and Riven crisscrossed the galaxy, gathering allies and resources for their cause. With each passing day, their movement grew stronger, and the bonds between them deepened. They found unexpected allies in the most unlikely places. There was Crix, a grizzled Tirani mechanic who had lost his family in one of the king's pacification campaigns. His skills kept the Shadow Dancer and their growing fleet of rebel ships in top condition. Liana, a former Royal Intelligence officer who had defected after discovering the truth, brought in valuable insider knowledge and a network of spies that stretched across the Empire. And then there was Draz, a hulking Krovok warrior whose people had long stood against King's expansionist policies. His strength and tactical mind proved crucial in training their ragtag army. But it wasn't just their allies that were growing in number and strength. With each passing day, each shared danger and quiet moment, the connection between Kayla and Riven deepened. What had begun as reluctant cooperation blossomed into trust, then friendship, and finally something more. Kayla found herself drawn to Riven's unwavering determination, his quick wit, and the depths of compassion that belied his fearsome reputation. For his part, Riven was captivated by Kayla's fierce intelligence, her adaptability, and the fire that burned within her. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed by their comrades. Crix would often grumble good-naturedly about love-struck fools whenever he caught them sharing a lingering glance. Liana, ever the pragmatist, simply remarked that their bond made them a more effective team. But it was Draz who put it most succinctly one evening as they all gathered around a makeshift war table on their hidden base. "You two," he rumbled, his gravelly voice filled with amusement, "are like binary stars, locked in orbit, making each other stronger." Kayla felt her cheeks warm at the observation, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she reached out and took Riven's hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. As their forces grew, so did the king's desperation. Reports flooded in of increased military presence across the Empire, of brutal crackdowns on even the slightest hint of dissent. The time for their final push was rapidly approaching. The plan they devised was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They would strike at the very heart of the Empire, the capital planet itself. While their main force engaged the King's fleet in orbit, a small team led by Kayla and Riven would infiltrate the palace and confront the tyrant directly. The night before the attack, Kayla found Riven on the observation deck of their flagship, staring out at the stars. She approached quietly, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Credit for your thoughts," she murmured, resting her chin on his shoulder. Riven leaned back into her embrace, a soft sigh escaping him. "Just thinking about how much has changed," he said. "A year ago, I was a hunted man, alone and on the run. And now—" He turned in her arms, his golden eyes meeting her deep blue ones. "Now I have a cause worth fighting for. People I'd die to protect." His hand came up to cup her cheek gently. "Someone I love." Kayla's breath caught in her throat. They hadn't said the words before, though the feeling had been there for some time. "Riven, He silenced her with a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Kayla saw all the love and devotion she felt reflected in Riven's eyes. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, his voice low and intense, "know that meeting you, fighting alongside you, it's been the greatest adventure of my life." Kayla felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "We're going to win," she said fiercely. "We have to. And then we'll build a better world," Riven finished, pulling her close. "Together." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the stars wheeled slowly by outside. Tomorrow would bring battle, blood, and the potential for heartbreak. But for now, they had this moment and each other, and it was enough. The battle raged across the skies of the capital planet, a chaotic dance of energy beams, explosions, and debris. The rebel fleet, though outnumbered, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and righteous anger. Every ship, every pilot knew that this was their one chance to overthrow the tyrant who had caused so much suffering. On the bridge of the rebel flagship, Draz coordinated the attack, his booming voice rising above the chaos as he issued orders and rallied their forces. Crix worked feverishly in the engine room, coaxing every ounce of power from the straining systems, and Liana, her fingers flying over the communication console, worked to keep their disparate forces coordinated and informed. But the true battle, the one that would decide the fate of the galaxy, was taking place far below, in the opulent halls of the royal palace. Kayla and Riven led a small strike team through the winding corridors, fighting their way past increasingly desperate defenders. The sounds of battle, energy weapons discharging, the clash of blades, the cries of the wounded echoed off the gilded walls. They fought as one, their movements perfectly synchronized after months of fighting side by side. Kayla's blade sang through the air, leaving trails of blue light in its wake as it cut down royal guards. Riven moved like the beast they had named him, all controlled power and lethal precision. Finally, they reached the massive doors of the throne room. Kayla exchanged a quick glance with Riven, both of them breathing heavily from the exertion of battle. "Ready?" he asked, his golden eyes blazing with determination. Kayla nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. "Let's end this." With a mighty heave, they pushed the doors open and strode into the cavernous chamber beyond. The throne room was a study in opulence, with soaring ceilings, intricate mosaics, and a floor of polished stone that reflected the light from crystal chandeliers. And there, seated upon a throne of gleaming metal and pulsing energy, was the king. He rose as they entered, his face a mask of cold fury. "Kayla," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "My loyal huntress, I see you've brought me the beast at last." Kayla felt a surge of anger at his words, at the casual way he dismissed all the pain and betrayal she had endured. "The only beast here is you," she spat, her blade humming with barely contained energy. The king's eyes narrowed, his hand moving to the ornate weapon at his hip. "I gave you everything," he snarled. "Power, purpose, a chance to avenge your people, and this is how you repay me." "You lied to me," Kayla shot back, taking a step forward. "You used me, made me hunt an innocent man while you walked free, your hands stained with the blood of my people." For a moment, shock flashed across the king's face. Then it was replaced by a cold, calculating look. "So the truth comes out at last," he said, drawing his weapon, a blade that crackled with dark energy. "It doesn't matter. You're too late to stop what's coming." He pressed a button on his throne, and suddenly the floor beneath their feet began to shimmer and shift. A holographic display sprang to life, showing a massive fleet of ships emerging from hyperspace. "Behold," the king said, a cruel smile twisting his features, "the culmination of my life's work. An armada unlike any the galaxy has ever seen. With this force, I will bring order to every star system, every planet. No one will dare oppose me again." Riven stepped forward, his golden eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "You mean no one will be left alive to oppose you? How many more must die to satisfy your lust for power?" The king laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "As many as it takes. The strong rule, the weak perish. That is the way of the universe." "No," Kayla said, her voice ringing with conviction. "That's just the lie tyrants tell themselves to justify their cruelty." With that, she lunged forward, her blade clashing against the king's in a shower of sparks. The battle was joined. As they fought, the holographic display above them showed the battle raging in space. The rebel fleet was putting up a valiant fight, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Ships exploded in silent bursts of light, debris raining down on the planet below. "You see," the king taunted as he locked blades with Kayla. "Your rebellion is doomed. Your friends will die in vain, and you'll live just long enough to watch everything you fought for turn to ash." Kayla gritted her teeth, pushing back against him with all her strength. "You're wrong," she grunted. "As long as there are people willing to stand up to monsters like you, there's hope." She disengaged, spinning away in a move that brought her shoulder to shoulder with Riven. They shared a quick glance, a lifetime of understanding passing between them in an instant. Riven nodded almost imperceptibly, then launched into a flurry of shots, forcing the king to defend. As he did so, Kayla saw her opening. She darted in, her blade singing through the air. The king, distracted by Riven's assault, was a fraction of a second too slow to react. Kayla's blade bit deep, slicing through the ornate armor and into flesh beneath. The king stumbled back, shock and pain etched across his face. This isn't possible," he gasped, clutching at the wound. "I am destined to rule." Kayla stood over him, her blade poised for the killing blow. "The only thing you're destined for is to answer for your crimes," she said, her voice cold with righteous anger. But before she could strike, the king's pained expression morphed into a triumphant sneer. He pressed a hidden button on his gauntlet, and suddenly the air was filled with a high-pitched whine. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a contingency plan?" he spat, blood staining his lips. "Behold, my final triumph." The holographic display shifted, showing a massive space station that had been hidden behind the planet's moon. It was unlike anything Kayla or Raven had ever seen, a colossal construct of gleaming metal and pulsing energy. "The Nexus," the king wheezed, a manic glint in his eyes. "A weapon capable of destroying entire star systems. With a single command, I can obliterate every rebel-held world in the galaxy." Kayla and Raven exchanged horrified glances. They had come so far, fought so hard, only to be faced with this unimaginable threat at the 11th hour. "You wouldn't," Raven growled, his golden eyes narrow with fury. "Even you couldn't be that mad." The king laughed, a wet, choking sound. "Oh, but I would. If I can't rule the galaxy, then no one will. The choice is yours, rebels. Surrender now, or watch as I reduce every free world to cosmic dust." Kayla's mind raced. They'd come too far to give up now, but the stakes had suddenly become impossibly high. How could they possibly stop a weapon of such immense power? As if reading her thoughts, Riven placed a hand on her shoulder. "Together," he said softly, "we'll find a way. We always do." Kayla nodded, her resolve hardening. They had overcome impossible odds before. They would do so again, no matter the fate of the galaxy now hung in the balance, with the Mad King's finger hovering over the trigger of a weapon that could end everything they had fought for. The final battle was about to begin, and the outcome would determine the future of countless worlds. But before she could strike, the throne room shook violently. The holographic display flickered, showing a massive explosion blooming in the heart of the king's armada. Raven's eyes widened in recognition. "It's Crix," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "He must have overloaded their flagship's reactor. The chain reaction is tearing the fleet apart." The king laughed bitterly, blood staining his lips. "It doesn't matter," he wheezed. "You've only delayed the inevitable. The Empire will survive, and someone new will rise to lead it. The cycle will continue." Kayla looked down at him, pity mixing with her anger. "You're wrong," she said softly. "We're going to break the cycle. We'll build something better, something just." She turned to Raven, her eyes softening as they met his. "Together." Raven nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips, despite the gravity of the moment. "Together," he agreed. As if in response to their words, the holographic display changed once more. The rebel fleet, bolstered by the destruction of the king's armada, was turning the tide. Ships that had previously fought for the Empire were now changing sides, their crews inspired by the rebels' victory. The king watched in disbelief as his carefully constructed empire crumbled before his eyes. With a final choking gasp, he slumped to the floor, dead. Kayla and Riven stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had accomplished settling over them. Then, moving as one, they made their way to the palace's communication center. Kayla took a deep breath, then activated the system that would broadcast her words across the entire empire. "People of the galaxy," she began, her voice strong and clear. "The tyrant is dead. His lies have been exposed, his armies defeated. But this is not just an end. It's a beginning." She looked at Riven, drawing strength from his presence. "We have a chance now to build something new, a society based on justice, compassion, and mutual respect. It won't be easy. The scars left by the old regime run deep. But if we work together, if we remember the cost of tyranny and the value of freedom, we can create a better future for all." As her words echoed across countless worlds, Kayla felt a profound sense of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, the future looked bright. Riven took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved your people. You saved everyone." Kayla shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did it," she corrected him. "All of us, together." As the dust settled on the battlefield, Kayla and Riven stood side by side on the balcony of the former royal palace. Below them, the capital city buzzed with a mixture of celebration and uncertainty. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Kayla leaned against the railing, her body aching from the battle, but her spirit soaring with their hard-won victory. "It's over," she breathed, almost unable to believe it. "We actually did it." Riven placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The battle is over," he said softly, "but our work is just beginning." As if to emphasize his point, a distant explosion echoed from the outskirts of the city. Pockets of resistance still remained, loyal to the old regime, or simply taking advantage of the chaos to pursue their own agendas. Kayla's fingers tightened on the railing. "There's so much to do," she said, her voice a mixture of determination and weariness. "Rebuilding, establishing a new government, bringing justice to those who supported the king's atrocities, and healing," Riven added, his golden eyes meeting hers. "For everyone who suffered under the king's rule, including us." A lump formed in Kayla's throat as the full weight of their journey hit her. She had been a weapon, a tool of oppression, before finding the truth and fighting for freedom. The path to forgiveness, both for herself and from others, would be long and difficult. Riven seemed to sense her thoughts. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small object. It was a crystal, no larger than his palm, that seemed to glow with an inner light. Swirls of color danced within its facets, reminiscent of the nebula they had traversed in their travels. "This is a heartstone," Riven explained, his voice soft with emotion. "It's a symbol of my people, given only to those who have proven themselves true of spirit and brave of heart." He held it out to her. "I want you to have it." Kayla's eyes widened. "Riven, I can't. After everything I've done, you've more than earned it," he insisted gently. "You faced the truth about yourself and your people, and you chose to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. That's what this stone represents." With trembling hands, Kayla accepted the heartstone. Its warmth seemed to pulse in her palm in rhythm with her own heartbeat. Overwhelmed by the gesture, she unclipped her energy blade from her belt, the weapon that had been with her through countless battles, the symbol of her former role as the king's huntress. "Then I want you to have this," she said, offering it to Riven, not as a weapon, but as a promise that I'll never again be used as a tool for oppression, that from this day forward, my strength will only be used to protect and defend those who cannot protect themselves. Riven took the blade with reverence, understanding the profound meaning behind the gesture. For a long moment they stood in silence, each holding a piece of the other's history, a symbol of their shared future. Then slowly, inevitably, they drew closer. The heartstone and the blade pressed between them as their lips met in a kiss that spoke of shared battles, mutual understanding, and a love forged in the crucible of revolution. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Kayla rested her forehead against Riven's, a smile playing on her lips. "So," she murmured, "ready to change the galaxy." Riven chuckled, the sound warm and full of promise. With you by my side. Always. They turned back to the view of the city, their hands intertwined. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but they would face it together. As the sun rose higher, bathing the world in light, Kayla and Raven stood ready to build a future brighter than either of them had dared to dream. In that moment, surrounded by the dawn of a new era, they were no longer the hunter and the hunted. They were partners, leaders, and beacons of hope for a galaxy yearning for change. The real work was just beginning, but with the strength of their bond and the fire of their convictions, Kayla and Riven were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story, like the galaxy itself, was only just beginning.